I'm going to turn it over to you, Dylan, for your introduction and take it away.
All right, cool. Yeah, thanks, folks. So I am sort of just finishing up master's at UW and have been working here for the last 5 or 6 years now. And kind of my introduction to no-till was through Dr. Aaron Silva's program, looking at no-till organic grains and soybeans especially. And so that's kind of where I started, and you'll see that with what I have to talk about. But basically, my hope for today is we'll be establishing several new types of no-till fields this year on our farm when I am finally moving back to the farm full time. And so, I just want to kind of bounce ideas off folks, talk about the differences between systems, and yeah, just have a conversation to see how we can help each other out. So that derpy looking dog there is our dog Luna, and our farm mascot. And I thought that was just a good representation of how hard I always end up thinking about how to figure out these issues like perennial weeds and such. So yeah, our farm is Circadian Organics. We started in 2018, kind of restarting on the farm that I grew up on. We do 70 to 75 to 100 member CSA. And also we do wholesale seed, and are potentially going to add a little bit of retail seed. We'll see where that goes. But that focus on seed production and the needs for disease control definitely inform some of our choices and goals with our system establishment here. So in terms of kind of our current production system, we're on kind of a rotational tillage, which I think is a great goal for all of us as vegetable producers, and a realistic goal. Tilling kind of every 2.5 years. We have 4-foot beds, not 4-inch beds, and 18-inch aisles. We lean a lot on oats and peas before summer crops for building fertility in soil, and then occultation, smothering those after mowing or rolling them down. And we also use living mulch in the aisles in pretty much all of our crops, except for once vining crops are getting ready to vine out, we smother that. And that's kind of where we ended up. We also do seed rye in the fall. We started with doing a lot of kind of rolled or mown rye no-till. And as we've grown the business, we basically don't have enough rotation space to get that in early enough. And then in our tunnels, where the space is more valuable, we're more like an every other year tilling. So, some of kind of weighing the pros and cons of our system here. So a lot of what we do is, yeah, like getting these lush cover crops going. And you can see in these pics, in this tunnel, we had, I'll say, a failed hemp crop in there the year before. And you can see that the hemp is about as thick as the oats and peas. But basically we just, in our tunnels, we're literally using a barrel because we can't get machinery in there, and rolling it down, smothering it with the plastic that we're planting into. And great fertility. A lot of the crops really love it. We have generally extremely low pest and disease incidence with the no-till system, which I think is partly the system health, and also partly reducing soil splashback on crops. One of my favorite things about it is it's beautiful. I love seeing the greenery everywhere, the living mulch in our pathways, and it's nice to have that and not bare soil. And the system works super well for suppressing annual weeds, this kind of rotational tillage. It does not work well for suppressing perennial weeds. And for us, that's particularly quackgrass and dandelion. And we're able to suppress Canada thistle pretty well with well-timed mowing or pulling when it's getting ready to flower, but that's a little bit of an issue as well. Other areas it falls down, I think a big drive for us in finding a different system is we use a lot of plastic, and we're applying it mostly by hand, because most of it is going, over top of rolled down cover crops. And I hate all the plastic. The mowing is pretty easy, a peaceful thing to do at the end of the day, but it certainly is a lot of time. And the living mulch and also the killed cover crop mulches will just suck all the water out of the top horizons if it's a dry year. On the other hand, if it's a wet year, which is a lot of times a year, it feels like we can go out during rain and not be mucking around out there, and I think that's nice for us doing the work, and I think it also contributes to the disease suppression. And then there's a few crops that we're just really struggling with in this system, and I think that the beets is obviously after our tillage step, but the cucumbers I just cannot get to work in the reduced tillage, all the different types and stripes I've tried. So kind of what we're looking for, one, I want to be able to grow cucumbers again because I love them and our customers love them, and we would love to move away from plastic, at least some. We want to make sure that our next system is scalable. I'm interested in systems that are both scalable both ways, right? That it can be applied in an intensive way and to crops that we maybe want to do rapid bed flips or rotations, but also I think to make a broad acreage impact and figure out those systems that work in that context is important. I should have said for our farm, we're at about 1.5 acres of vegetable production, which includes both our fresh market and our seed production. And the seed production is right now scattered about over 3 different sites. And we're going to be adding 2 more sites this year. And that's part of why we're kind of thinking a lot about, systems establishment. And then we also do quite a bit of prairie seed. Also other factors that are important to us in the kind of system we set up are, the flexibility on establishment timing. So, I loved the rolled rye system, but God, I just cannot get rye planted in mid-September. And so it's, that has really fallen off because I just can't get the biomass production and the adequate tillering for full coverage. Reasonable cost is obviously huge. I think, especially for systems like, the deep compost mulch system can have a huge upfront cost. And it's a little unclear to me, like, what that payback is actually like in terms of, labor reduction on weeding. So a while back, I got the opportunity to go to a field day that Claire and Fair Share co-hosted at Two Onion Farm, where they did a SARE grant looking at kind of a deep compost mulch and wood chip system and the trade-offs between the labor of establishment and the labor of weeding. And they basically found that it took so much time to, with a tractor bucket to bring in and shovel compost that there wasn't the payback for weeding timing. So we're going to talk about kind of tools that might smooth that establishment out and maybe make the payback a little bit better. For the seed production, like low disease carryover is really important to me. And I do think that, residue of plant residue and no-till systems is a big consideration and for the seed crops, and is potentially part of what might be contributing to our troubles with cucumbers. But we're not really seeing that with other cucurbits, so I'm not sure. And yeah, we want happy soil, we want happy plants. I'm okay with a 10% maybe yield drag, 5 or 10% yield drag, especially if the yield I do get is healthy and marketable. But beyond that is kind of pushing into the territory where it's like hard for us to justify. So, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I encourage everybody to do this when they're thinking about their establishment of, I love doing pro-con lists and kind of comparing things out, I'm making all these, columns of kind of what are my goals and how does stuff compare so that I can really think through it, So I'll just try and speed through this a little bit because I do think it's useful. So we kind of have our current cover crop based reduced tillage system that's very living mulch heavy. that really established in the spring, early green manure, and then just prior to planting or plastic laying for, or just after plastic laying for seeding the living mulch. And spring, as we all know, is a busy time of year. So, sometimes it works really well for me to get out there in March and be able to seed the oats and peas. And sometimes I don't get to it. And then it's April and it's like, oh crap, I got so much to do now. In terms of when we would be looking at establishing the other systems, it's really the prior season. And so, the other systems we're weighing right now are the deep compost, what I like to call kind of a long tarping system, which is, occultation based, but for a full season. And I'll get into that. But, one of my friends at Wild Mountain Seed in Colorado, that's what they do to deal with bindweed. And, and they also grow great high quality seed. And so that's one of the options that I'm looking at. And then I would love to get back to a crimped rye system. I mean, I really think crimped rye is a beautiful system for our northern tier, in terms of full winter coverage of living roots, fits in with equipment that historically has been in the area, grain drills, and is coming into the area more with organic row crop farmers like roller crimpers and stuff. So, I can access that equipment from my neighbors, and I would love to get back at that. And, one of the other things I want to highlight here is the kind of far right column there of the rotation potential. And what I mean by that is the potential to actually rotate the whole system. So, I think big trade-offs in these different reduced tillage systems approaches have to do with how intensive or extensive they are, like how much for this, full prior season establishment of the long tarping, or the establishment in mid-September for rye, when there still are a lot of valuable vegetable crops in the ground. We got to think about how are we going to do that? And the easiest answer is to put it on adjacent land, or another block or field, so that you don't interrupt your current rotation. So those are very extensive systems versus the deep compost mulch. Once you make that investment, you want those to be permanent beds. You want to recoup that investment over the course of many years. And so that's a much more intensive system. And, I think that there are likely disease suppressive benefits of that deep compost mulch system. I haven't seen any specific research, but it intuitively makes sense to me. But in the event we got a difficult seed-borne disease in that plot, it would be, hard to rotate out of that for us, with the investment costs there. Any questions before I move on? I should have said people are welcome to interrupt, but here I want to just, for the rest of the time, basically kind of open it up to, like, let's talk about these different systems and other ones too, if you all have other ones. And, so I'll kind of lead here with what we're looking at, but please, as I get to the end of each of these slides, please feel free to jump in and share. So, one of the big challenges that we're concerned about with the deep compost mulch system is obviously establishment. And so what we're looking to do to deal with that problem is we're going to custom hire a much larger vegetable farm near us to come in and build raised beds on the whole field. I don't have a bed shaper, and I'm, don't want to borrow someone's BCS and rotary plow and do it that way, because we like our 4-foot bed tops in terms of maximizing space. And so we're going to hire somebody in to do that. And then we're looking at modifying a manure spreader, like this clip I have here from Green Things Farm Collective in Michigan, who some of their members have spoken with the group before, and they're doing awesome things. I encourage everybody to follow along, both in terms of being a cooperative farm and in terms of their classic deep compost mulch system, where they've basically, so their manure spreader still has the beaters on it. It's a fully functional manure spreader, a small 4-foot spreading width. And basically what they did is build that plywood baffle onto the back to just catch everything that's thrown, so it falls down. Seems to work really well for them. I would worry a little bit about the potential to clog in the beaters underneath that baffle where you couldn't get to it as easily, or if stuff wasn't flowing well, if there's a problem with your walking floor, etc. But I haven't seen that happen to a lot of folks. Cost is the huge one for us here. So I'll get into this on the next slide, but basically as I costed it out, for a full acre of building the raised beds, applying 6 inches of wood chips to the paths and 3 inches of compost to the bed tops, the labor for doing that, getting the manure spreader, which is obviously and modifying, which is a one-time cost, but it came out to nearly $15,000. And oh my God, that's a hard pill to swallow. But if I end up hardly doing any weeding in there, if I don't really have to purchase in amendments, if the disease suppressive benefits are awesome, those are very real cost trade-offs there. Plastic is an unfortunately low cost in a way, but that it's a very valuable for us philosophically to get away from that as we can. So before I open that up for questions, I just want to, so you can see here, that they basically loaded up, they built this additional baffling onto the box itself so they can fit an extra yard or so in there. This is not their establishment phase, but kind of what they do on an annual basis of spreading a, more like 1 to 2 inch layer. And my memory from what Eric Campy said to our group when he presented is that they're on establishment, they're putting down more like 3 to 4. But you can see that looks beautiful. It's dependent on them having that great source of wood chips and compost, but if folks do, then it seems like a really good fit. And as Eric said when he presented to our group, if you're on less than an acre, I think, how did he put it? If you're on less than an acre doing market gardening, this system is a no-brainer. And he said he'd wish he'd switched to it years ago. So this is kind of some of the cost associated, and I don't have this much depth for the other systems, but I just wanted, this is a really popular system right now. People are really into it, and I just wanted us all to kind of think through it together. So we are looking at being charged $150 an hour for that custom work, which includes both the ridging as well as the bed shaping. So it's pretty intensive, and we don't have the horsepower for it, but that's $150 an hour. The manure spreader, the spreaders themselves, we're looking for kind of an old John Deere beater system. We don't even or beater as in, it's okay if it's a little bit beat up, but we don't even need the beaters on the back of it. So I'm lucky to have a great mechanic that I work with who's helping us with the fabrication, modifications, and maintenance of our equipment. And we're looking for a spreader in the $400 to $600 range. If y'all have looked lately, equipment seems to be ranging hugely in cost. And so it's like, if we have to go further out and pick one up in another state or something like that, and the hauling cost, there's a lot of unknowns there. And then we'll be building sort of some different style of baffles on the back. And rather than, keeping the beaters and building those baffles to catch the throw like Green Thing Farms Collective did, what we're looking at doing is almost like a depositor for asphalt. If you're an equipment nerd and you've ever seen those at work, like kind of have a pan on the back of the spreader that's maybe a couple feet long and the full width of the spreader, but the sides have kind of adjustable wings so that I could throw further out or narrow it in, and then an additional kind of bolt-on baffles that would allow us to extend that, and if we wanted to, use the spreader to kick wood chips into the aisles as well. Challenges I think with those systems are, if it's a ground driven rather than PTO driven spreader, obviously matching your ground speed to your rate of application can be a challenge. And so yeah, that's one thing we're playing with. We're also thinking about actually building an additional little kind of add-on modifying adding on to sort of a side discharge for the wood chips rather than the baffles. So we're going to be playing around with that, and I'm hoping to host kind of a field clinic in August when we're establishing that plot, and would love for folks to come out and look at it with us and play around and see how it actually works. Compost is the big cost for sure. Holy cow, it's expensive, you know, at 30 to 33, depending on the source I checked, per cubic yard plus trucking. You know, if I'm trying to put 3 inches on each of my beds, and we're not establishing a full acre, but you know, that's a lot of compost, and that's where the bulk of the cost is. Wood chips a little bit less so, but also very expensive. And you know, we have a lot of invasive tree removal to do on our land as well, so is potentially encourage us to do that ourselves. Before I go on, anyone want to pipe in with thoughts, questions, experiences?
There are a few questions in the chat, Dylan.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't tracking that.
Oh, no, that's okay. It's hard when you're screen sharing. I'm not. There's one about integrating animals in the system.
I can jump in on that. That was my question. So in your slide, Dylan, about the different systems, I didn't see one about using animals to prep the ground. For example, I just use my chickens and ducks over the winter to prep the ground in my hoop house. And by prep the ground, I mean destroy all of the grass, etc. I didn't see that as one of your systems. I didn't know if you'd considered that at all.
Yeah, I appreciate that thought. We have considered a little bit. We're not livestock farmers at all, beyond just a little bit for our family. And, you know, less so, I guess, for the seed production, but still to a certain extent, and definitely for the fresh market produce, you know, even beyond the 90 and 100-day windows for our organic certification. It still makes me nervous to have that manure deposition in there. But, you know, some of the most successful stories I've heard about reduced tillage vegetable systems are definitely people following livestock. I think that I totally agree with what you said earlier. I'm a big proponent of, you know, reintegration of livestock and farming systems. We do have a neighbor that custom grazes on pasture. And so if we are starting to have trouble battling seed-borne diseases with our seed crops, something I've definitely thought of is like grabbing a different corner of the pasture each year, and, you know, being able to have that really long rotation and benefit. But that's awesome. And so are you able to keep them out of there, you know, within the 120 days?
Yeah, so I have I didn't say this earlier, we have 4.5 acres. Of the 4.5 acres, half of an acre is going to be in intensive vegetable production. We do use the deep compost mulch system, and I have some thoughts to add to what you shared so far.
Yeah, please.
But I'll come back to that. We have 30 chickens, 6 ducks, and 2 geese that we rotationally graze on a pasture. We use electric netting to contain them, and for the most part, that's pretty effective. I have 2 chickens that were gifted me from another farm that didn't grow up with that netting, that regularly get out and get into areas that they shouldn't, so they may not live much longer. But that netting is pretty effective at keeping them where I want them to be and out of where I don't want them to be. And so my hoop house is brand new. We got it in October. And over the winter, I put the birds in there just to take the remaining grass out. I had a pea and no cover crop in there, and I wanted them to do as much damage as possible. We moved them out of there the last day of February so that I would have a minimum of 90 days FSMA-wise. We're gonna be planting that in, you know, cucumbers, tomatoes, etc. So we just moved them out, and we're in the process now of, we broad fork, and then we bring in our compost to set those beds up. And once, like you talked about, like rotationally rotating the whole system, once those beds are set up, I don't ever want the chickens back in there, because they'll just destroy everything, unless I'm like resetting the system. So like I could see myself in, you know, 5-6 years after we've really worked that compost over, if we wanted to like do a reset, I might let the birds back into that space and let them destroy it again. But in lieu of that, no, they won't go back into it. But if you go in there, There's a couple of patches of grass, but they really did their job. So
Cool.
it's just another system that I thought you might consider. About
Yeah, I appreciate that.
the compost stuff, there's a little bit of conversation going on between myself and someone else in the chat. One of the things I think you really need to look into is the type of compost you're sourcing. One, because it drastically affects the price of this, but also it's what you're going for in this system. You do not want a super nutrient rich, usually for animals, compost that can actually burn your plants. What you want is plant-based compost, which is usually a lot cheaper. A lot of like municipal cities and whatnot have composting systems now. So I get mine from a city that's over an hour away. I'm getting it for less than $10 a yard. And then I have to pay for delivery, but it's worth it. What you're getting is mostly organic matter. And the key is in the title, deep compost mulch. The compost is supposed to be a mulch, not a nutrient source. You want your plant roots to actually get down through that compost and pull the nutrients from the soil. So yeah, I would look into what your compost source, make sure it's plant-based and not animal-based.
Yeah, so what the composts that we've been looking at, there's one that is from scraps and yard waste and is plant-based, and then one that is manure-based. I've used both in the past for both mulch and just a smaller application rate as an amendment. Both are priced very similarly.
Okay.
We have like we're quite a ways away from any larger municipalities. La Crosse is probably the nearest city, which I didn't check with them about their composting situation, but I'll check. I will definitely do that. It's a good tip. A lot of the municipalities near us, unfortunately, burn all of their plant wastes instead of composting it. So yeah, that's a really good point. I think, there's pros and cons. Anything that is truly organic compost and has been truly cured and met the temp requirements and the aging requirements shouldn't burn. But there's always that risk for sure. So, I'm not talking to the local dairy farmers that just have their, passive composting manure piles and stuff. And I'm sure they'd love another spot to spread manure, but I don't really want to mess with that. But those are really good points. I appreciate that. And yeah, compost source is so important. And I've heard horror stories about residual herbicides in compost, and it's true. You gotta trust your source. And great points.
Other thing that you can do with that, again, gets to your system and when you're setting it up, if you can get your compost delivered a season ahead of time and just piled up on your land.
Yeah.
One, you can let it finish working through its compost system, right? And you'll avoid a lot of problems there. But two, if you have your own compost system or your own nutrient development, if you make like a compost spray from your stuff, you can inoculate what you get, which will make it more natural to your system. So just another quick tip.
Cool. Yeah, I like that thought. Yeah, it's a good idea, just having a static pile. I do like that idea. We're going to be getting our compost kind of in the off season, right? Like in August for establishing beds for the following year, because I would like to be able to cover crop on there to deal with that potential of hotter soil, or just kind of mellow things out a little bit for the fall. So it's not, most people are ordering compost in the spring and stuff, so it's definitely less intensive, but we'll see when I get my next quotes later in the summer. And I'm definitely going to check with that other municipality near us now.
And the last
anyone
I
have?
Oh yeah. The last I had was about your wood chips. If you time it, if you get lucky, look for your municipal power supplier. Even call them. They have to maintain the power lines, and they will send out tree trimmers. If you get on their radar, they will come and drop wood chips and it's actually would be the better wood chips remedial. It's the growing tips of the plants, which is better for soil.
Right. Yeah, more micronutrient rich. We have a call into our power cooperative, and I'm hoping they want to come drop chips, but they also, because they're on farms and a lot of times when people will use it, they will drop it on whoever's property they are working next to if they want it. So, but I put my name on the list for sure.
And then there's another comment from Clint in the chat about the deep mulch system, saying to look at Farm in Princeton, Minnesota. Working there, they had a compost. Sounds like Clint worked there. They had a compost dropper that did even low drops of over 100-foot spans. Clint, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's a gosh,
Is it a drop spreader?
It's a black one. I can't remember the name of it now, but they don't really make them anymore. I think they were designed for kind of like horsey people to go out and spread their stuff from their barns and stuff. But yeah, it's a wheel-based dropping system, and it's like a perfect amount for a 100-foot bed.
Cool.
And it's great. It smooths it off. I mean, if you did 2 runs, you can get it done in 6 minutes. And we did, when I worked for them, I mean, I spent a week on that, just covering 2 acres. And to be sure, they spent probably, I don't know how many thousands on compost, but they had a municipality with a plant-based compost. But once or twice, there was some weeds that came up in that compost. Or once they got a semi-load and it was not all the way done. So be very one-on-one with your compost source, and make sure you don't want to plant in the wood duff. That was rough.
Yeah, good tip. Yeah, maybe the type of machine you're talking about are more often called drop spreaders.
Yeah.
When we've looked at those, we were looking at the option of using barge boxes, which were kind of more common in the old days and built for hauling soil around, really, and also have walking floors on the back lift gate, no beaters. Parts are harder to come by, the walls are not as durable, and the wheelbase on the ones we could find wasn't right for our system. But yeah, I think it's really important for us all to kind of think outside the box on this, because that application step really does seem like a bottleneck for a lot of people trying to move into this system. And, I could definitely see this, like if we are doing our setting up our deep compost mulch beds in late summer, early fall, and, having this modified spreader available for somebody else in the area to use could be a great opportunity for equipment sharing. I also wanted to share, because kind of jogged my memory with the broad forking, that another part of this system for us is we'll be using a deep ripper in there to break up compaction, either a single or double shank depending on the crop.
Hey, Dylan, is there a reason you don't want to just use a tractor loader bucket to dump it on each row?
Time. So, to do that. So that's what I was mentioning, that SARE research project that 2 Onion Farm carried out. And, the loader is certainly a big upgrade over the wheelbarrow method that we did our first year we tried it, but it still is pretty time intensive to get that application right. And, going from the pile and just a scoop at a time. Whereas, and also, having people, one of the big benefits Green Things Farm talks about is, they used to need to have people there at the front of the tractor with shovels or rakes pulling, spreading the mulch as it was kind of being dumped on the beds. And now it's a 1-person job. They can have a loader tractor and their cultivating tractor pulling the spreader, and so that's a big factor for us.
Dylan, there's one last question. I think most of the other questions in the chat have been handled, but Sam is asking you to explain your 2.5-year rotation and tillage rotation, pardon me, and how it intersects with your crop rotation. So you don't have to do that now, but just it's out there when it seems to fit in.
Yeah, good question. Let me spy forward in my, I think I have a slide coming up that'll be an opportunity to get to that. Cool.
I'll just throw in one more thing about spreaders.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've come across Mill Creek. They have something called a row mulcher. It's wicked expensive. We put in a grant for one. It's like 20 grand minimum. But looking at that design is interesting. I thought about it when you mentioned this like side discharge.
Yeah.
So they're kind of sweet because they side discharge at really like kind of dialed in variable rates with a funnel that can give you a really narrow band. And then it can also bottom discharge like a regular spreader, although it's actually out the front. And they're
Oh,
built
interesting.
to hold tons of yards. So I mean, like
Yeah.
their smallest one is probably 7 yards and it goes up to 20 yards or something.
Yeah, because those are
Um,
built for wood chips and leaf mulch and stuff, right? Not the heavier
Right,
compost. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen
So
those
again,
and also
too
saw the
expensive, I
price
think, for-
tag.
Yeah, exactly. But I think looking at some of those plans is interesting if you're doing modifications. I just love that idea of the 90-degree, conveyor, 90 degrees to the apron. So anyway, just throwing it out.
Yeah, I do as well. And yeah, a lot of folks in our area, like it used to be that people had a lot of the old manure spreaders sitting around, which is why we're focusing on that from all the small dairies that were closing down. And then seems like most of them went to the scrap yard in the past few years, unfortunately.
Along those lines, I've thought about using a side discharge chopper box that might work for mulching aisles.
Yeah.
It might kind of dump onto the top of the next bed if you're doing 4-foot bed tops with wheel track between them, which is what we do, and that's what I was thinking about. And then the other thing is up by us in Marathon County, there's a lot of ginseng, and every once in a while I've seen, just perusing farm equipment on Craigslist and whatever, that they have basically a big hopper box for putting gravel between the raised ginseng beds.
Huh.
And that might be another thing that if you were to come across it, could be a much cheaper option, but still allow you to be, and that would handle, compost or mulch, I would think.
Yeah, if it can handle gravel,
or-
that's a great
yeah.
idea. Next time you see one of those listings, hit me up.
Okay, I will.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, I feel like as people keep experimenting with modified spreaders and options for that, this is going to be one of the things that I do feel like is people are going to dial in on good options and modifications over the next few years. I think there's enough demand that I wouldn't be surprised if one of the, kind of hobby farm companies or something like that puts out something that's actually affordable eventually. So yeah, I've got high hopes that deep compost will be more widely adopted. Amazingly, we're all already almost at 4 o'clock, so I'm going to kind of smash through the last of these last few slides I have, and we can keep the discussion rolling. I can stay for another 20 or so minutes after 4 if anybody else wants to keep the conversation going. As you could tell by the picture of my dog and how hard I'm focusing on no-till at the beginning, I can really talk about this forever with people. So this kind of take on occultation, that is really like full season, or like Casey at Wild Mountain described it to me as he'll do it for at least 6 months, and he wants to catch some of the hottest parts of the year. So sometimes he'll take it off, or he'll start with a spring cover crop and then put it on to get a lot of biomass under there to break down and feed everything, or he'll take it off in the fall to put it on a winter kill cover crop, depending on what he's got coming in the spring. But yeah, I feel really lucky that we don't have super terrible bindweed yet, but we've, it's in the neighborhood, so to speak. And like the quackgrass, and especially the Canadian thistle, it's like, man, I've put a tarp on there for 3 months, literally one time, and took it off, and the Canadian thistle just like shook it off and woke up and was ready to grow again. And so, this is another space extensive approach, right? It takes land out of production for a significant amount of time. I have some reservations about the potential for the soil health impact, especially if you're not trapping a lot of residue underneath there before you put it on. If you're just like cycling all of that carbon and all the nutrients that are underneath there, getting it really hot, like what does that do long term? The way that I see the system playing out for us would still be establishing living mulch paths. We'd still need landscape fabric or organic mulch or cultivation to be keeping down weeds. So it's not ideal in that situation, but we do struggle with the grass and dandelions and weed and creeping Charlie to a little bit lesser extents. And I would love to have a solution that could really tackle those. And I think this, one of the great benefits about this, tarps are, a nice large tarp, silage tarp is going to run me a few $100 at least, but I can get multiple uses out of it. And all I need is a bunch of cinder blocks, and I can, as Eric once said with what they do at Green Things Farm Collective, you can move those around on a pallet pretty easily as opposed to sandbags and stuff. And so it seems like a pretty accessible system. So we're going to give it a go. This is my take on the perennial weeds trying to get into our 8 months of tarping. And then the last one is that I would love to get back to is the crimped rye. And I think, this has been a challenging system for many folks. Again, it's space extensive, and I think in our little valley out in the driftless of Wisconsin, Southwest Wisconsin, we are pretty much zone 4A, technically 4B, but we get like 10 degrees colder than the weather in our valley. And I have to get the rye in by mid-September or, end of September, third week of September to get that growth. Because otherwise the hills and the angle of the sun, it just isn't enough growth. And so it's challenging for us with vegetable, rotations, I think. I would love to, have a grain drill, but at least we have them in the neighborhood. I think, really good, like that, you got to treat that rye like a super valuable cash crop because it's doing all of your weed control work the next year and building that biomass. So when we were doing the rolled rye system for our cucurbits and our brassicas and our hemp, when we actually thought there was a market for that, we were fully tilling it, getting a nice clean seed bed for that rye to go in so it could really take off. And then we were even irrigating with sprinklers if it was too dry, because it's so important. Not suitable for direct seeded crops. Planting into it is definitely labor intensive to plant by hand. I've seen some cool designs for no-till transplanters, but again, price tag is kind of difficult. And then this is just a really nutrient challenged system. So we would put on an additional like 40 pounds of nitrogen per acre beyond recommended rates to deal with what was getting trapped in the rye, roots, and straw. And that's kind of it. So, this is an aerial shot of our farm, and in the valley is where we have our some of our productions right now, and we have another plot up here that's a elderberry alley crop with vegetables for seed production. And we're thinking about we'd love to be able to drop spread wood chips on our elderberries as well. We're establishing another elderberry field up here, thinking about putting a deep compost system, roll dry, tarping. So in a year or two, come visit and you can see how it worked out. Sorry for running over. Any other thoughts about those other systems?
I have a quick question for you on when's anthesis for you, where you're at?
June 7th through 13th ish.
So was
this last year it was earlier, but that was pretty abnormal for us.
I mean, for us, the huge problem has been it just doesn't, I think sounds like we're pretty similar. A huge problem has just been like it doesn't fit the planting window for most of what we want to put in.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, for us, like the cucurbit crops, I feel like putting row cover over to keep it hot and stuff, like honestly, there were some varieties of winter squash, and this is a whole tangent I could go on of the variety by management interaction. There's some varieties that I feel like have actually excelled in our no-till system. Like my favorite example is honey nut squash in our area, some people have a hard time getting it to yield well or ripen, and we get awesome yields even in our cold valley in our reduced tillage systems with that. And then there's other ones that just can't catch up. That little picture there in the bottom corner is actually a variety that was bred by Wild Mountain Seeds in reduced tillage systems. And I have noticed in general that kind of varieties that are bred in organic reduced tillage systems meant for that, or old heirlooms that maybe weren't bred in intensively managed systems, seem to do pretty well. And then other varieties are just like, oh my God, where's my chemical fertilizer? I'm gonna die. But so it worked well for kind of winter squash, mid-season cucurbits, except for cucumbers, which hate me. And it worked okay for our fall brassicas. It worked great. But yeah, like other stuff, that timing is definitely a challenge.
And when you're saying you put on an extra 40 pounds of N per acre, are you using, is this like bagged products, or you're trying to calculate that off your compost? I'm interested in what, like that initial application. I don't know if you're side dressing later or what initial application.
Yeah, that's a great question. We haven't been doing much side dressing. We did 1 year side dress with CPM in our brassicas. But basically what I did is I went and found a publication, I think from Nebraska or somewhere like that was like, this is how much nutrients rye straw removes. And granted, there's the roots that are sucking up some nutrients too, but I didn't even try and account for that. I just said, okay, here's a ballpark of what the rye is removing. And so instead of having, a nutrient credit from manure or compost or something in my calculations, I literally put a deficit in there and I just applied extra NPK. And so that's mostly at planting, and for a lot of our no-till systems, we're basically top dressing, for some nutrients, or if we use compost, which we don't often, we'll put it in the planting hole, but mostly we're just setting stuff next to the plant, setting a little scoop of our mix next to the plant and trying to get some sort of mulch over that. And I think and then water it well. And I think that as that stuff starts to break down, it gets sucked into the rye and then breaks down later, and it holds a little bit, but there's definitely some wastage in terms of nitrogen turning into NO and just evaporating. But
when you did the rye, was it just rye, or did you plant a legume or mix with it?
I did. Mostly just rye. So we did try 1 year broadcasting red clover in the theory that it would sort of fill in where the rye was thin, and it did a lot more, and it ended up being really competitive. So I think there's potential there, I think, and obviously I would like to have a diverse system, but man, rye is a beast on its own. And it's harder to kill other things. So, rye vetch is a popular combination, but the timing just doesn't line up in our area for adequately terminating it. You need like one pass with a crimper when rye is at anthesis. And if you're trying to kill vetch at the same time, I've heard people say that they need like 3 passes to kill it. And I've never even tried. Yeah.
Have you heard of combining the rye vetch systems with the occultation systems? I've seen some people that will, basically kill it before the anesthesis thing with occultation.
And yeah, and that's kind of what I do with oats and peas. And for me, they're quicker, they're more succulent, so I feel like they're going to release nutrients quicker. So that's what we do with that. We have put landscape fabric over rye when we killed it early to knock it back, and it worked. But I feel like I'm still getting that nutrient deficit and not getting a lot more benefit. And I'm probably getting some more weed control benefit than I would with oats and peas. But yeah, it's just been hard to get in our rotation.
And to clarify, when you say oats and peas, are you doing that in the fall or the spring?
Spring.
Oh.
I go out literally as early as there's enough inches of soil thawed to either push my earthway seeder in the tunnel or just broadcast over. And sometimes I'll broadcast over, and then, you know, if we have a little compost to put down, we'll put that down as well. But as long, you know, I haven't really had any problems with getting stuff established, as long as, so for instance, like when we have our living aisles and then we have a bed that had landscape fabric over it the year before, we pulled, so I leave landscape fabric on over the winter to protect from the compaction of rainfall. And then when we pull that off, I'm just putting out that on the bare soil, maybe raking it if the soil is fluffy enough that it'll actually make a difference, or maybe pushing the earthway through with the peas if I really want to get them in there because I'm late. But you know, in the past, we've done it in, you know, as early as like early March, and so it's getting really cold. Albert Lee, who we buy our cover crop seed from, they didn't even think the peas would survive with seeding that early, and maybe in another year they won't. But you know, we just get it out there as early as we can, get a lot of biomass off of it.
And then to kill that, you're covering it or you're crimping it or what?
Yeah, we're covering it. So sometimes we'll mow it or we'll roll it down, but the kill step is definitely the covering. And I think you're right about, you know, combining these different systems. You know, I presented them as different because kind of thinking about the establishment method, but obviously a lot of people that use deep compost mulch are also doing tarping, and I think that fits really well, makes a lot of sense. And yeah, the rye could fit in those other systems. You know, maybe someday we'll, you know, have a smaller scale crimper that we could use and be able to you know, put rye on just on our bed tops in one of those permanent bed systems and still use that for weed control. So definitely good synergies.
What I'm thinking about, based on what you're saying and everything, like I said, I have the deep compost mulch system. My biggest time of weeding is in the spring. All the weeds that I fight are just basically windblown seeds that get established in the spring. And so I have to do a lot of weeding in the spring, but after my crops kind of fill in their canopies, I don't have to do any weeding. And so for me, there's a lot of value in what you're doing with your peas and oats in the spring. If I can have any kind of canopy over that soil up until my last frost, which is usually around May 4th or so, you know, if I can cover it from March to May and then have a clean bed to then seed into, that's what I'm curious about. Like, do you think that would work?
I do think so. Yeah. I mean, depending on what your weeds are that you're dealing with. And for us, our most competitive ones that establish throughout the rotation are those perennial weeds that just have enough energy storage that they're ready and raring to go, even once we take a tarp off from early spring when it's cooler. Claire, maybe you would have a better handle on kind of rule of thumb of the, you know, how long something needs to be tarped in the summer versus spring. But I know it varies a lot.
Yeah, I mean, my experience is somewhat limited, and I did it for 2 weeks to 3 weeks in the month of June, late June, and it worked for rye.
Yeah, I think it can definitely kill rye, but having the you know, how clean it could get for a direct seeded crop. I think, you know, we've had rye on no-till crimped rye that we planted hemp into, and then that we put landscape fabric over the following year to plant tomatoes into, and still had rye residue on the soil the following spring. It was amazing.
Are you crimping the rye? Well, my question is really about the oats and peas. Are you crimping that or just rolling it flat with that barrel?
Just rolling it flat with the barrel, or we've crimped it as well and didn't really notice any like better kill per se than just with the occultation. And you know, we've gotten pretty fast at like just putting big clods of dirt on to hold our plastic down but another like risk of that system that maybe folks wouldn't think of or would, and I was just being stupid, but is I want to highlight is that like when you first smother that, the biological activity under there is just going crazy, and they're like, you know, as they're trying to survive, they're pushing up against the plastic, and so it gets a little pillowy. So if you plant into it too early, you really have the risk of transplants getting, you know, kind of how they get stuck under the plastic sometimes. And also I think that's part of what has contributed to our struggle with cucumbers, which are so sensitive, is just like that insane biological activity that's going on in there, and the cucumbers can't keep up. Their immune systems can't keep up. I don't know. I haven't seen great kill of oats and peas from a crimper, which is surprising because they're softer stemmed, but I think it's actually because they're softer stemmed, right? They have a little more flex, instead of, you know, you're really severing that xylem with rye and stuff that's a little more lignous.
Can you say more about the barrel? Is it just a barrel, or is there weight to it, or what?
It's a barrel. I got to be a burn barrel. And then I was like, yeah, before I, you know, get it all nasty, I'll use it to roll down some peas. And then it turned out to work well. And I was like, I feel bad about burning stuff anyway. So we just used it for that. Yeah. Just a regular old barrel, no weight or anything. It's literally just laying it flat enough that I can, you know, adequately tack down that plastic. And I will say one of the things I like about the oats and peas, but depending on your goals could be a drawback, is after the season's done and I pull that plastic up in the fall, or if it's landscape fabric and I'm pulling that up in the spring, it is clean under there. That stuff is just gone. There's no trace of it. But unlike the rye. I was seeing in the chat, I was taking a peek at the chat. I saw you made some comments. Tenzin, I saw you made a comment about a 4-foot no-till drill. Man, I would love that too. It would be really nice to just be able to really do some detailed, you know, pinpointed seating on the bed top. I would love that.
Well, I mostly just want something, it wouldn't even have to be spectacular, but something that can at least cut through crop residue so I can avoid my fall tillage. You know,
Okay.
Now I'm wiping a bed out and then reseeding it as fast as I can, just to try to have something overwintering. But if I could just get that in one pass, I don't mind leaving the stubble, but I don't have anything that'll put seed down. And if I just broadcast it, and I've thought about even just trying to take like a crimper over the top, just hand broadcast a bed, and then try to better run a cultipacker over it or something just to get better. I don't get good seed to soil contact and good germination if I don't put it in the ground a little bit.
Yeah, I hear you there. I've definitely struggled with that as well. And then I look at my neighbors who are having seed flown on, and they've got this beautiful rye field. I'm like, how did you do that? So if you have anybody that's flying seed on near you, it might be worth talking, like if they are adjusting their seeding rate or anything to help with that. One tip that Claire dropped in some workshop years ago was that I started doing was disconnecting the PTO on the rototiller and kind of using that as like a pseudo cultipacker, and that's worked okay for us.
That's a good idea. I think when they fly seed on, a lot of times they use that I don't know, that like powdered water stuff. You know, so that it'll hold moisture to it better and help it not dry back out. The one thing that I started doing this last year, and I had pretty good luck with it, but it could have been just rain timing and everything, was I was trying to mix on biological inoculants, just essentially like a compost slurry. But I think that pre-mixing wetted them once before I spread them out, and maybe that helped, or maybe the inoculant helped, or maybe we just got a well-timed rain. I don't know. Yeah,
I know my neighbors fly on seed that it's not, you know, it's their own bin run rye seed, and they have had great luck with it. And I ended up I had some accidentally bought some old rye seed from someone that I was like, sure, I'll use it, and then turns out it was really old and didn't germinate, and I bought stuff from them, and you know, it worked a lot better. So the seed source too is important. And I think like it is worth getting named varieties for no-till. Some of them that'll put on more reliable and uniform biomass and have the more uniform anthesis state.
We've had Maggie just wrote in that she's upping the seeding rates. I mean, we, you know, at our scale, which is like rarely more than 5 acres of cash crops, you know, we just double, triple, quadruple. I mean, like it does, you know, the cost of rye in particular, or oats and peas, even the peas I'll often use a seeder, but you know, just really going for it on the seeding rates. It just always pays per acre. I mean, it's just, you know, as an input, it's just not a significant line item in our budget. And we've just, yeah, over the years, I feel like we just keep upping it and upping it. Now we're trying to experiment going in the other direction. The thing we've had luck with establishment, and I mean, it can get tricky, is undersowing. And I'm curious if other people have messed with it. In particular, you know, we do a lot with undersowing white clover, usually in July. That's sort of our favorite thing. But then like for carrots, for example, we often have trouble getting something well established because they just come out so late. And it's often too wet at that time of year for us to run any equipment over it at all. You know, just so if we broadcast before we harvest, like right before we harvest, generally we find it just by pulling the carrots and walking over that bed and whatever, and then you have a little bit of residue of the carrot tops. The rye seems to do pretty well. I mean, it depends on the year, but in general, that's been a pretty successful way to get it started. Or we'll see rye down a week or two before harvesting. You know, things in the brassica family, and we've had decent luck with those peas too. But I mean, it's really crop by crop, so it's not like a full-on solution, but it has helped, yeah, with some of those questions of it takes away that tillage pass post-harvest, and it can move our window up to where that cover crop might really be successful over the winter.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And again, something that I hope as more people are playing around with the systems and as more research is done, like we'll get some better recommendations coalescing on like timing for underseeding or broadcast seeding or what to do. I go back to what Tenzin was just saying too, is like if I had an implement that could put the seed in the soil without a tillage pass, that would be really nice. Like it at our research station outside of Madison here, we even have like a old horse-drawn drill from the 50s that it was just a heck of a beater, but like all it has to do is get that seed in the soil just a little bit, and then it's like a 10 times difference from it being on the surface of the soil in terms of how quickly it takes off after germinating. So yeah, I've done that as well post carrots. White clover, we're kind of moving away from some just because some of the research I've done in my experiences, like I feel like it does a good job in some ways, but it's also risky and like it can be pretty competitive. And because it's perennial, like depending on what I want to have going on there the next year, may or may not be a good fit. It does definitely take to like overseeding well. The research I've seen is that it's actually less shade tolerant than red clover or crimson clover in terms of establishment, especially than red clover. And that's why like in small grains, they'll always be frost seeding on red clover, also because they can get better cuttings off of it. But I'm interested in that taproot that the crimson clover and the red clover have as opposed to the white clover. I feel like there's some benefits to that.
I did finally do some significant underseeding last year and had some success. Things were very small coming out of crops, but I think about competition, but it seems like, there's probably not really likely to be much competition there as long as, the crops are up and going. Small seeded stuff isn't likely to take over is my initial impression.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's been my experience as well. Oops, we might have lost, or at least I lost you on the end of that comment.
No, I was done. Sorry. I was talking to my
Okay.
daughter at the same time.
Okay. Yeah, I think the timing, like if you're seeding like a few weeks or I read somewhere someone was telling me about like keeping a month after transplanting. Like if you give stuff a solid month to get some growth going and establishment, then it can usually outcompete a interseeded cover crop. Like one of my problems though that I've faced with wanting to seed in the pathways as well is that if I'm seeding stuff after transplanting, then I just trample the heck out of the living mulch and it doesn't establish well.
Dylan, there was a question that we didn't get to in the chat. Actually, two I wanted to bring up. One was about the overlap between your 2.5-year system rotation and your crop rotation. Did you want to?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So the tillage rotation that I was talking about is different than the these other systems that we're going to start working with this coming year. But that tillage rotation has been with the living mulch system basically. And so what we're essentially doing is tilling before things like any direct seeded crop, and also before our alliums, just because we are planting them so early that we can't really get anything in ahead of them anyways. And it kind of worked out to be able to, in terms of the blocking size, to also till before. So it's basically before alliums, beets, carrots, greens like spinach or baby greens. Even though we plant leeks later, we've been tilling before that as well, because otherwise it's a bear to get them nice and deep. I think that's basically what we till before, and especially in the at the front of the season for the early planted stuff that we are not really going to get cover crop in as well. Otherwise, for like late season salad mix and stuff, we're doing almost all one cut so that we can transplant it and not have to till. And then so we kind of have like cucurbit blocks and solanaceous outside solanaceous / brassica. We don't do a lot of extensive brassica production just because we can't compete with some of our neighbors. And then we kind of have a mix of greens and direct seeded crops that we work with as another block. And so it makes it work pretty nicely. And on that sort of on the second to third year and by the third year, because we have white clover and red fescue in our path mix, they're getting pretty aggressive by that point. And so it works well to terminate then.
So hopefully we'll be able to come and visit in August for your field clinic.
Yeah.
Nick asked when in August. Do you have a date lined up yet, or is that still to be decided?
TBD. Yeah, we can figure it out. And I want to make sure that my mechanic, who does all the great fabrication and customizing work, can also be there. So probably a weekend so that he can get away from his day job. But yeah, we'll see. We'll definitely keep folks apprised by the listserv, I'm sure.